We're about to start. So welcome to everyone, but welcome especially to Professor Derek Jolliffe and Dr. Hannah Gaffney, who we're delighted to have here this evening. So Derek is one of our homegrown MPhil students from many years ago and a current visitor to the Institute. He's Professor of Criminology at Royal Holloway, University of London. He was Professor and Head of the School of Law and Criminology at the University of Greenwich. He's currently the co-editor of the Journal of Development and Life Course Criminology with Manuel Eisner and chair of the Division Developmental and Life Course Criminology of the American Society of Criminology. He's led funded research projects for the Ministry of Justice, NHS, National Offender Management Service, National Police Improvement Agency, Equality and Human Rights Commission, the National Probation Service, Corsten Independent Funding Council, Danish Police Knowledge Research Centre, and the Ministry of Justice, Chile. He developed the basic empathy scale, which has been translated and validated in 13 countries, and he has over 9,000 citations, according to Google Scholar. On November the 13th, he was named as one of the 50 leading lights at the Kindness and Leadership Awards 2023. So many congratulations. This is to acknowledge leaders who impact others through kindness. Dr. Hannah Gaffney is a research associate here at the Institute of Criminology, the Betty Behrens Research Fellow at Clare Hall, and an affiliated member of the Violence Research Centre. In her role here over the past year, she's led on the digitisation and archival of physical records of data collected during the Cambridge study in delinquent development. As an expert in systematic reviews and meta-analyses, she's currently leading on a review of the effect of restorative justice interventions for children and young people. She's also associate editor of Aggression and Violent Behaviour. Dr. Gaffney completed her doctoral research here at the Institute. Her research evaluated the effectiveness of anti-bullying programmes in schools, and since then, her work has primarily focused on understanding what works to reduce the involvement of children and young people in crime and violence. This has included collaborating with the Youth Endowment Fund in creating a toolkit to summarise the evidence on the effectiveness of different intervention programmes for children and young people. So we're very honoured to have you both here. Derek will obviously talk about this, but the Cambridge study in delinquent development is a prospective longitudinal study of 411 London males who were first assessed in 1961 at age 8 to 9. The main aim of the study is the development of offending and antisocial behaviour from childhood to adulthood. Derek now co-directs this study. He's the third generation, so from Donald West to David Farrington to Derek, and he's just managed a new sweep of data collection of the men aged 70. So the purpose of their talk this evening is to celebrate this influential study and its visionary directors, consider its recent contributions, reflect upon the process of the electronic archiving of the original paper records, and on future developments that will maintain the CSDD, as it's colloquially called, as a world-leading study. So thank you very much, Derek, and over to you.
I don't know if there's any time left for the actual talk. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. One other person I'd like to draw everyone's attention to, those in the room, is Richard Turner, who's here at the front. Richard is the data collector for the Cambridge study in delinquent development and did interviews at age 48 and has done all of the interviews that we've been able to complete at age 70. Richard's expertise in being able to get the interviews, his knowledge about the Cambridge study is absolutely essential in moving forward. So I'm really happy that Richard's able to be here today as well. So these are the slides. It should not surprise anyone that I am not David Farrington. These are the slides that David had prepared, and I believe Alison invited me to speak in the hope that David would be able to come here. Unfortunately, David has a progressive illness that is going to prevent him from attending, which is really sad because David was incredibly dedicated to all research, but particularly the Cambridge study. I was just speaking with Alison about David and his passion for the Cambridge study, and it really is unparalleled. And I'm really happy that that David's still interested in the Cambridge study. This picture, unfortunately, has turned on its side. That's it always does because David uses the old version of the slide. I didn't want to change it, but that's a picture of David and I at his house. I went to visit him today. what we're going to be talking about is the Cambridge study in delinquent development and its main contributions, particularly focusing on the main things that have come out in the last 10 years. There have been 120 plus publications in the last 10 years that we'll summarize in a few minutes for you. And then we're going to talk about some of the recent developments of the Cambridge study that will hopefully solidify it as one of the crowns and the jewel of the Institute of Criminology. The work that Hannah's been doing has been absolutely amazing in that regard. As Alison mentioned, the original aims of the study were to describe the development of criminal and antisocial behavior, particularly in white urban males. It was designed to explain why offending begins, why it continues, and importantly, why it ends. And if you're interested in why it ends, we have to know all the way to the end, which is one of the main contributions that the Cambridge study has over and above many other prospective longitudinal studies. The study was really designed with an a-theoretical approach. The idea that those who developed the study knew was that theoretical approaches change. And so information from a lot of different data sources and a lot of different theoretical backgrounds were assessed. And these have been assessed consistently up to the 10 waves of data collection that have taken place. It starts with 411 South London males from a never-to-be-named area of London. A research office was set up in this area of London, and all the young people attending those 6 schools were included. Obviously, it was different in terms of research ethics in that time than it is now. All the boys were age 8 to 9, mostly born in 1953. And they were predominantly, as I've mentioned, a white, British, and working class background. Very few from any sort of ethnic minority backgrounds. Most had operational fathers and mothers. It was what would be considered, as I said, a very traditional British white urban background. In 1960, Donald West was appointed as one of the original research directors here at the Institute of Criminology. And he went to the then director of the Institute of Criminology, Leon Radzinowitz, and said, I'm very interested in doing a study on homosexuality. That was not allowed. Because of that, Donald then opened himself to other ideas, and apparently a person who worked in a school in Bedford was aware of the work of the Glukes and the Glukes longitudinal study, and suggested to Donald that he should do a longitudinal study. And that's how the Cambridge study came to be. Donald reached out to the Glukes to get some information about how they measured certain constructs, family things, and so forth, but found them to be quite impressionistic and difficult to measure, very subjective. And as a result, he got in contact with the McCords, who just produced a very influential book called The Origins of Crime. The McCords were very helpful in explaining how certain family factors should be measured. And so the Cambridge study is very much modeled on the study of the McCords. David Farrington joined the Cambridge study in 1969, took over as director in 1982. For a brief period of time, the Cambridge study was run out of Queen Mary, University of London, and collaborations from Jeremy Coy. I'm taking charge of moving the data collection forward, and we're hopeful of getting more funding to get a more full sample than we have at the moment. But the funders that have funded this in the past include the Home Office, the Department for Health, as well as the Department for Education, RAIN Foundation, Barrow Cadbury Trust, Smith Richardson Foundation, and we'll start a Kickstarter at some point soon if we can't find anything else. The males were interviewed at age 8, 10, 14, 16, 18, 21, 25, 32, and 48, with some at age 70 now. For all except the ages of 21 and 25, when the issues with funding, the idea was to get an entire sample of individuals. The parents of these children were interviewed once a year between the ages of when the boys were the age of 8 to 15. We have peer ratings of the boys at age 8 and 10. We have the teacher ratings at age 8, 10, 12, and 14, and the criminal records of these men up to age 61. That was last searched in 2017. We would love to do another criminal record search for any of you that have particular pull in the Ministry of Justice. That would be fantastic, but they seem to be shutting us down at the moment. There are multiple constructs and multiple data sources. There's a lot of information. The recent summaries of this can be found in a fantastic journal, the Journal of Development and Life Course. I encourage you all to look and cite that journal extensively. But there are other places that David has summarized the key findings of this study as well. At age 48, there was a social interview where the men were assessed. They're assessed with a very large, thick interview schedule that Richard is absolutely amazingly skilled at administering, measuring aspects of life success, their relationships, their accommodation, employment, drug use, about drinking, physical fighting. At age 48, we also had a psychiatric interview where measures of psychopathy were administered, as well as the SCID, structural clinical interview of the DSM. Some of the men consented to their partners being interviewed as well. So we have measures of partner violence from both sides, as well as information about whether their partners were antisocial, as well as neighborhood factors. Height, weight, heart rate, waist measurement, respiratory function, testosterone, blood pressure were all assessed at age 48 as well. At age 18, 95% of the men were interviewed. At age 48, 93%. This is a really important point. The men who are the hardest to interview tend to be the most antisocial and contribute more to the validity of the studies, which is why we need to assess as many men as we possibly can. At age 48, of the 411 men, 17 had died. 13 of those were convicted. We'll come back to this, but for those of you that don't know, offending is very bad for your health. 5 of the men weren't traced and 24 refused. In addition to the men, the children were interviewed as well. This was conducted between the years of 2004 and 2013, when the study was at Queen Mary. It was only possible to interview the young people who were 18 or older at the time, and we also needed the father's consent to contact the children. So there were 653 young people who were eligible for interview. Of those, 551 were interviewed. This is unique in the Cambridge study because we actually have some females for the first time. So we have the daughters of the original men. The median age of the interview was 25, with most of the young people being between the ages of 23 and 27. Even some of the 17 of the 29 individuals who were abroad were interviewed. So you can see the comprehensiveness of this. And this is how David likes to illustrate the generations of the Cambridge study. So generation 2 is the original, but we have information about their parents. We also have information about their children. And so the question then becomes, can I get the next slide, next group of slides up? Which I can. Fantastic picture, Hannah. This is a picture, I believe, of the unnamed area of London at the time when the young men were interviewed. What I'll be talking about for the next brief period of time before Hannah takes over is the key findings from the Cambridge study in the last 10 years. So this comes from a publication, a Springer Brief. David was always really keen on Springer Briefs. They're very quick ways to get like a book out and summarize knowledge very quickly. And so this book covers offending from childhood to late middle age, all the convictions up to age 61. And you can see that when we look at criminal careers up to age 61, that really is the main contribution that the Cambridge study has, this duration of criminal careers. You can see at ages between 10 and 13, there were 409 boys at risk. Of those, 40 were convicted. They committed 67 offenses. There were 40 who were first offenders. So the probability of first conviction was about 10%. You can see that that increases from as the boys age from 14 to 16, and then starts to decrease afterwards, the probability of first conviction. Overall, there were 178 males who were convicted. That's 44%, 947 convictions. So that's a general idea of a community sample. About 44% of the individuals ended up with convictions. As I say, it would be good to have conviction information past age 61 now. One of the main contributions, because of the duration, of this study, we can start to see the relationship between when individuals start committing offenses and their average criminal career duration. So 40 males started offending at age 10 to 13. They had an average of 9.3 offenses with an average criminal career from age 12.3 to 29.7. You can see again that decreases the average duration of criminal career decreases the average number of offenses decreases, and the average length of criminal career decreases as the men aged. Overall, 178 offenders, there was an average of 5.3 offenses, with the average criminal career starting at 19.5 and going to 32.1. So again, keeping in mind that this is very much a community sample, this is what we would expect the average to be, although perhaps these individuals came from a bit more of a deprived background than a general sample. This is one of the more interesting but troubling findings, I'd say, for the Cambridge study, for those of us that work in areas where we work with individuals who are involved in the criminal justice system, and we'd like them to desist, because what we're seeing is many individuals don't desist the way that we would like. After 5 years after an original conviction, the probability of a reconviction is 48.3%. 10 years, it's 29%. Keeping in mind that most of the research that I was funded for to do with the Ministry of Justice when we're looking at reoffending is looking at reoffending over the next 2 years. That clearly does not give us the appropriate picture of someone's likelihood of reoffending. Even after 20 years after the first conviction, a person has a probability of 12.9% of a subsequent reconviction. Looking at self-reported offending, you can see that those who've been conviction-free for at least 30 years since their last conviction had similar self-reported offending scores to non-convicted males, so probably had desisted. But even after 40 years, there's still a possibility, an increase, well, 5.8% likelihood of a later conviction. Another major contribution of the Cambridge study is looking at the childhood risk factors that predicted offending. Lots of studies have looked at factors that may predict whether somebody commits an offense or not. Where the Cambridge study is unique is being able to look at the childhood risk factors that predict the duration of criminal career. And in 2020, David produced something in criminal behavior and mental health that looked at the childhood risk factors that differentiate people who have longer criminal careers to people who have shorter criminal careers. And he found the strongest predictors of what he termed to be life course persistent offenders, and those are people who had criminal career durations of at least 20 years, were harsh discipline, poor parental supervision, having a convicted father, and parental conflict. Importantly, he noted that the predictors of conviction didn't significantly overlap with the predictors of criminal career duration, leading him to conclude that the extensive knowledge that we have about the risk factors for offending doesn't tell us much about, or advanced knowledge about the risk factors for life course persistent offending. George Azar and David Farrington then looked at the factors that would, or differentiated those who were life course persistent offenders based on conviction, so who had criminal career durations of 20 years or greater than convictions, and those who had criminal career durations of 20 years based on self-reported offending. Of course, there's considerable overlap between the two, with very little differences. Of the 24 risk factors that they looked at, these two groups were similar, all but three, with those who are official life course persistent offenders being high on impulsiveness, high hyperactivity, and having parental disagreement. So those people who are self-reported life course persistent offenders overlap considerably with those who are convicted life course persistent offenders. Another contribution the Cambridge study has made is looking at biological factors that are associated with offending. I will restrict this discussion to low resting heart rate, which is a measure of cortical underarousal. David and colleagues looked at low resting heart rate and its ability to predict later violence up to age 61. And they found that 27.1% of those with low resting heart rate were convicted at 18 and they had convictions for violence, compared to 13.6 of those with high resting heart rate. overall, high resting heart rate, the reverse of low resting heart rate, proved to be a protective factor, or low resting heart rate was a wide-ranging potentiating factor. So, for example, things like large family size, which has consistently been associated with offending in the Cambridge study, was associated with later violence, but only amongst those individuals who had low resting heart rate. Looking more generally at convictions and not just convictions for violence, David examined the interaction between resting heart rate, childhood risk factors, and later convictions. Having a depressed mother, harsh discipline, being difficult to discipline were all associated with later convictions, but again, only amongst those individuals who had a low resting heart rate. One of the factors that we were able to assess in the psychiatric interview is psychopathy. Now, this is a contentious construct for sure. Best considered sort of a constellation of psychological and behavioral traits that increase the likelihood of crime, violence, and harm. One thing we do know about psychopathy is there's very limited success for any sort of evidence-based interventions once individuals have or are given this condition. So really, the focus should be on prevention. But there are very few studies where we're able to look and see the prospective factors that predict whether someone becomes a psychopath or not. David and Henrietta Bergstrom found that low resting heart rate at 18 was related to later psychopathy, or increased likelihood of psychopathy in the Cambridge study, and that many of the childhood risk factors were related to later psychopathy as well, particularly having an uninvolved father, a convicted father, or low family income. Interestingly, these tend to be what would be considered family or social factors, when often it's considered that there's unique individual biological or psychological factors that are associated with psychopathy. Because of the partner interview, we have information about intrapartner violence. David, Alex Picaro, and colleagues examined the potential overlap between offending trajectories, criminal violence, and intimate partner violence, and the childhood factors associated with these. And what they found was there was a significant overlap between those convicted of violence and those convicted or those who are involved in intimate partner violence. And there's very, very similar childhood risk factors. Including looking at the risk factors, these didn't contribute to explaining the violence or intimate partner violence after controlling for the trajectories that Alex had modeled. And his suggestion was that it was the offending frequency. So the fact it wasn't that individuals are specialized on intimate partner violence or specialized on violence, but just the frequency of offending is what was explaining both behaviors. They drew the conclusion that this may limit the benefit of intimate partner violence specific interventions over and above broader-based, evidence-based intervention efforts that we already have to deal with violence. As I mentioned before, crime is very bad for your health. There's a strong association in the Cambridge study between antisocial lifestyles and negative health outcomes. Guy Skinner, who was a PhD student here, found that self-reported organic illness, self-reported on the social interview, and hospitalizations were much higher amongst those who were life course persistent offenders, who had a 20-year criminal career duration, as opposed to what's called late onset offenders, those who didn't start offending until after the age of 20. So both groups, life course persistent and late onset offenders, had greater self-reported organic illness and hospitalizations. Life course persistent offenders also had twice the likelihood of disabling medical conditions, increased likelihood of mental health problems. But there's good news here as well, because much like your body can recover from smoking, I think it's 20 years, you need to be a non-smoker before your body is the same as being a non-smoker. Your body can recover from offending as well. So those who stopped offending at age 20, their health was not different than individuals who were not convicted at all. Using the Cambridge study, David developed the integrated cognitive antisocial potential. The key construct of this theory is this antisocial potential and long-term antisocial potential as well. Long-term antisocial potential is this between individual variation that is influenced by impulsiveness, by strain, by modeling, socialization processes, and many of the other concepts from the theories that came before it. One of his key postulates is that the relative ordering of this antisocial potential is going to be consistent over time. That means that the individuals who are the most antisocial at age 32 are likely to be the most antisocial at age 48 and potentially the most antisocial at age 70, even though the absolute level of the behavior may change over time. The theory also incorporates short-term antisocial potential as well. So within individual variation, motivating situational factors like being drunk or having lost a job. This is what the theory looks like with long-term, with all of the events, with all of those concepts at the top, explaining this long-term antisocial potential. So impulsiveness feeding in, life events feeding in, life events, things like losing a job, getting married. And certainly we know from the Cambridge study that when individuals are employed, they're much less likely to be committing offenses than when they are employed. Antisocial models as well. This theory is obviously based and developed on all of the results of the Cambridge study. David and Tara tested the concept of this antisocial potential using the 20-item antisocial attitude scale that was administered to the men at age 18, 32, and 48. The results were, not surprisingly, supporting the theory. Those individuals were the top 25% in terms of antisocial attitudes, and the antisocial attitudes ask questions like, the police are often roughing people up, or if anybody harasses me, they're asking for trouble. The individuals who scored higher on those measures were much more likely to have convictions. There was great consistency in that antisocial attitude scale across the years of 18, 32, and 48. And those who were higher on the antisocial attitude scale differed on many of the childhood risk factors from those who were lower. The Cambridge study, however, has also made major contributions to other theories as well. It was used to test the labeling theory by Joe Murray. It was also used to test a really interesting scientific criminal career theory by John McLeod, who was also a PhD student here. John developed a really important mathematical modeling approach to explaining criminal careers using the offenders index. John worked at the Ministry of Justice for many years, and he has then validated that theory using both the Pittsburgh Youth Study and the Cambridge study in this 2022 publication. One of the main contributions that the Cambridge study has information on all of its life events. In the previous set of 10 years, a lot of research was done looking at the impact of getting married on offending. More recently, Delphine Theobald at Kingston University looked at the impact of the birth of one's first child and marital breakdown on later offending. What she found is that there was a reduction in offending from several years before the child was born and several years after, but the effects were not what we would consider to be large. Interestingly, however, the effects were larger in what was called so-called shotgun weddings, and that's when the conception happened before the marriage took place. If the men stayed with the child for more than 5 years, there's greater evidence of reduction in convictions as well. So there is an impact of the birth of a first child. In terms of the costs, David did work with Raff and Gower looking at the monetary costs of both official and self-reported offenses of those of the Cambridge study. At the time, the individuals had 629 officially recorded offenses over 40 years, coming to a cost of just under £3 million. The average offence was £4,637. Each male cost about £7,000 and about £17,000 per offender. However, when we look at self-reported offending, it's about £22 million for the 11,469 self-reported offences, or about £60,000 per male. So very costly. Now I'll hand over to Hannah to talk about some of the new developments. There are, of course, ongoing analysis taking place with the Cambridge study right now. There's been a recent publication looking at successful self-reported offenders, so those individuals who self-report a large number of offenses but are never convicted. We have Miguel Basso Pereira, who's looking at using our script, our code, to look at the ordering of offenses and magnetic risk factors, so what might be pulling the ordering of different types of convictions together as well. But I'll now hand over to you, Hannah.
Okay. have to change the slides.
The next.
Hi everyone, it's nice to be on this side of things for a change. So I'm going to divert us a little bit. So Derek has eloquently talked about the findings and the study over the many years. And so I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about essentially what I've been up to for the past year. So I came back to the Institute as a research associate part-time in January and have been spending time archiving the Cambridge study. So since its inception, as you can imagine, there's a huge volume of paper that has been collected. And I hope David won't mind me telling this story, but as the story goes, apparently when David retired, he acquired a second property. And unbeknownst, or unfortunately for his wife, it wasn't a holiday home in Cornwall or south of France or something. It was this house just outside of Cambridge, colloquially known as the Data House, or affectionately known as the Data House. And he turned it into a library for his life's work, essentially. So when David retired, he went and acquired all of the paper records that had been collected over the years. I think they were held in various different institutions, possibly with Jeremy McCoy down in London as well. So he rescued it all. There was some here in the basement in the institute as well, and kept it all together, make sure everything was in order as is his way, and for which we are forever grateful, because it now has led to some exciting opportunities, which I'm going to talk about. So the data was stored in this data house. One of the issues with this is the security issue, and also access, needing to be able to get into it and have a look at the data, but also the longevity. It wasn't a sustainable solution for storing the data. Paper doesn't last for forever, and some of the paper was very old, and so we needed to go through a process of preserving it for not only the next generation, but also of researchers, but the next generation of research ideas. And so this is what it looked like inside. As you can see, all of the data was stored in filing cabinets and various different miscellaneous boxes. It was an exciting time to spend time down there. Many a morning, you could only spend a morning there because there's no water on the property. So I went down and spent time with the data itself, going through, sorting it. We had various different types of data as well. So in total, there were, amongst a lot of the other paper that David has collected of his various different publications and other research projects, there were 16 filing cabinets in total full of Cambridge study data. Each filing cabinet, of course, was meticulously organised. For those of you who've had the pleasure of working with David Farrington in the past, you'll know he is to the letter and very organised, thankfully, and it made my life much easier. We had different types of data in each different cabinet. It was all sorted by participant IDs. Some of the data, as you can see in the images here, were a page per participant, particularly the older data was stored that way, and others were collated and collected per participants and stored in folders. And so my role then was to facilitate the process of removing the data. So we had to get it out of the data house and then scanned it electronically. We did discuss the idea of removing it to a different location. So continue to store it in its physical form. However, due to the amount of data and security issues and various different things, that wasn't feasible. And so the decision was made to scan it electronically, store it securely, and preserve this data and the study for many years to come. So the first step involved creating an inventory. So during my mornings at the data house, I went through and recorded essentially what was missing. So the concern is, I'm sure you can imagine, this study has not only a lot of people who care about it from a professional point of view, but also a lot of personal connections to the data and to the study. It has been the basis for many PhDs, many research projects. And so it was essential that in moving it from the data house and securing it and scanning it, that nothing was lost along the way. So we had an external company come in and take the data away and scan it off-site and return it to us. And so to do so, we had to create an inventory. So I recorded everything that was missing that wasn't there. And so then, and I'm really pleased to say that actually everything that was taken by the scanning company was scanned. And we had a record then, and nothing was lost along the way, which was fantastic. And then also implemented a process for quality assurance. So I randomly looked at 25% of all of the files that were returned and just checked the quality of the scans, the resolution, making sure everything was there that should be there. And Steve from ScanView, who did this work, isn't with us today, but if he was, I just want to take a minute to appreciate his patience with me for micromanaging the whole situation, but it turned out really well. The scans now are stored electronically in the institute, so we have them. There's a process in development, but almost in place for anyone who wants to come and access them and spend time with the data. I think that's the main contribution of this whole process, really, was that from the outset, I didn't understand that not a lot of people have had the chance to sit with the data from the Cambridge study and to actually look at the physical records. And now, hopefully, that experience will be more accessible to more people to come and look at the scans that we have. The resolution is very good, and also another benefit of that is that it helps with reading some of the handwritten notes and comments. I'm sure Richard and many of the researchers who've worked on the data have contributed, and some of the interesting content. Some of the most interesting content is in those handwritten notes and comments and perceptions that people had along the way. We also gained a lot of other stuff. So this was another set of data. I've tried to outline it as best I could. This was the miscellaneous items. So the records of the process of conducting this study over the years. In the middle shelf there, you've got books of logs of minutes from meetings over the years. David had kept pretty much everything. And we have taken this stuff hasn't been scanned. Some of it has, some of it hasn't. There's also then on the left that hasn't been outlined, we have acquired numerous folders from David. Every time I see him, he gives me more folders to take from the data house, which is the next step, is to look at some of that material and to explore kind of more of the process of conducting the study and how was it done. Derek, you mentioned earlier research ethics being quite different, and I think there's some interesting ideas to think about there. One of the main things really that what I've learned through this whole process is that to start looking not only for the future for the Cambridge study and to look at the age 70 interviews and collecting more data, and to continue its contribution to our understanding of criminal behaviour. The study is also a piece of criminological history, and I've been looking into some interesting ideas. There are some historians, some historical researchers who have been undertaking exercises in looking at social science studies like the Cambridge study as a source for historical inquiry. The Cambridge study is unique in the fact that we have data from the same individuals over their life course. Other historical inquiries who've done this have had to rely on accessing different studies at different years and different time points, whereas we've got the same people. We also have custodianship of the data as well, so getting access is a little less of an issue. And not only that, is the data is very complete. There's also a lot of other data in there. We have talked about, the research findings, and there's various different SPSS files and things out there that people have looked at the relationships between different variables and have done various different statistical analysis. But we actually now have as well the ability to look at the narrative data, the kind of more qualitative side of things about the context and what else were people saying. Someone said that they carried a knife and that was coded quantitatively as carrying a weapon. But now we can look at what did they actually say about carrying the knife? What's the context to that? And so one way, and this has been done, Professor Tara McGee has been doing this with looking at fights and violence. And so one example of that is Tara's work looking at the ICAP theory, and particularly the relationship or the difference between long-term antisocial potential and short-term antisocial potential, like Derek was mentioning. And so it's just a really interesting opportunity to look at some of this more contextual information. I chose this quote because I don't know why, maybe I'm a Marvel fan or it just stuck with me, but this kind of additional information, I fancied myself as a Thor, god of thunder. Like there's so much more detail here there's so much more detail that we can extract and that we can try to understand from this than this individual saying that they have or haven't used a weapon and what weapon they have used. So that's all from me. I'm happy to take questions at the end, but for now, I think I'll pass it back to Derek to tell you about the future of the study.
Thanks, Hannah. Mostly thanks for what you've done. The archiving of the Cambridge study, that's an incredible amount of work and dedication that went into that. Something that will exist in posterity at the Institute because of what you've done. So that's absolutely amazing. One thing that I've been working on with Richard is interviewing the males at age 70. We've got ethical clearance through the Institute of Criminology to do that. And we have adapted the social interview to be age appropriate. It asks them about their life circumstances and health, accommodation, their home conditions, who they're living with, relationships with partners, whether they have children and grandchildren, their income, employments, and social activities. We administer questionnaires, the Antisocial Attitudes Questionnaire, the Ising Personality Questionnaire, as well as other general health questionnaires as well. So the idea is hopefully to find out, we have changes from 18 to 32, but what about changes from 48 to 70? And we have had some progress on this, although it has been slow because it's very difficult for us to find funding. We've been knocked back by a bunch of funding organizations. So we've been using little bits and pockets of funding, and Richard has been absolutely amazing at doing this, working on this. He has opened 48 cases. This started only after the pandemic. We've done a death search up to before the pandemic, but not during the pandemic. Of the 4 men that we had targeted for interview, of the 48 cases that we'd opened, 4 men had died. 8 are proving elusive. I'll let Richard speak to why that might be the case, but he has mentioned the electoral role and drop off in people's interest in voting might be behind this. 2 people patently refused, and 6 people we have waiting in the wings. Richard, did you want to say anything about the interview? You can come up and speak about the interviews. I think that'd be great.
Okay.
I think they'd like that.
Where do you want me to?
Why don't you come here?
Okay. Okay, so I started last summer, and with all, I started originally in 2000, and it's always a case of trying to trace people and trying to persuade people. They're the two challenges. And in terms of tracing, it is getting harder because people are now opting out of the electoral roll. They're no longer, well, they're on the electoral roll, but they're ticking the box not to be displayed publicly. And this has become a slight problem for me. Generally, in the city that we're talking about, you have some that still live in the centre and some that live further out in the suburbs. What else can we say about it? I mean, there's 20% that are really enthusiastic and love the idea of being in study, and then you get about another 50% that will do it, but they need a little bit of persuading. They need, or they might do it for other reasons, and then perhaps a hardcore, perhaps a 20, where you really have to work to get them. And then there's but we generally got in the 90s, so the amount we're not finding or that refuse, hardcore refusers, is really small actually. In terms of what I'm noticing, some of them are now moving into flats and bungalows, and health issues are looming large. Is there anything else you'd like me to say about?
I'm just interested in your impression of what it's been like working in the Cambridge study.
Okay, let's think about that. Well, I first started in 2000, so I worked on it from 2000 to 2007, then 2009 to 2013. I mean, it's really just a lot of the, as I say, the main challenges are finding people. When you have these huge long gaps between, you've really got to find out what happens to people. You've got to be creative. You've got to. It's working out a puzzle. I used to sometimes get the old records out to see where did they work, what kind of work did they do, things like that, to kind of figure out what might have happened to them and where they went to. And then the persuasion, typically you will phone someone or doorstep them. I find doorstepping is more effective. I think it's more easier to refuse over the phone. And the chances of doing it there and then are probably not very high, but it's always worth taking the stuff with you. They might just say, yes, all right, come in. I've certainly had that. And you think, well, actually, if they're willing to do it here, I may as well take it now rather than wait. And yeah, it's getting them to realise you're not just going to disappear. Sometimes I think people think with people making contact that if they just ignore you, you'll go away. But I think they realise after a while that's not the case. That we will be persistent. And there is the factor that it's always been a well-worn path that we're treading. Since they were 8, they know what the study is. Yes, that again. Yes, come in. Yes. I won't say too much there. No, okay.
Just make sure you stick around so you can answer questions for sure. Thank you, Richard. It's fantastic that Richard has been willing to do this. The continuity's been brilliant. I've learned a lot from Richard. But one of the questions I will be asking about is about the persuasion, perhaps when we're not being recorded. Of the 28 interviews that completed, I've been able to do some really intensive results. I've been incredibly busy lately, but I just wanted to let you know, give you a picture of who we're picking up. Remember, these individuals are relatively close to London because we're limited in terms of funding. They are the individuals we're able to locate fairly easily. But we're interviewing, the average age of the individual we have is about 69 and a half. Most are living with a wife or a partner. About a third, or just over a third, have a health condition that they find limiting in their day-to-day lives. Although most would rate their health compared to their peers as being good, very good, or excellent. Really interestingly, considering where in the time period that these individuals grew up, most describe their childhood as happy or very happy. Many of these children were born without indoor plumbing at the time. And something for us all to target by the time we reach 16 and a half, just under half are going out once or more a week, which is more than me. But anyway, Here's, of course, what we all really want to know with the Cambridge study. We coded the drug use in the last 5 years. We coded the kicking, punching, or threatening someone in the last 5 years. All the same wording of questions have been asked since age of 18. There's also 12-item anonymous self-reported questionnaire that they're administered where they sort cards. So they're not specifically telling Richard what they've done. They're doing that. Of the 28 participants, what is the prevalence of self-reported offending of 69.5-year-olds? Just to give you some context, age 48 prevalence for the entire N of 365 was 27.9. At age 69.5, it is 39.3%.
Pretty active.
Pretty active. Pretty active. Now, of course, there's two ways to look at this, but these individuals were the easiest ones for us to find. So this is something that justifies the continued study of the continued interviewing of men at age 70. This has not been done before. We don't know what 70-year-olds are up to. Now we do a little bit, and it's quite surprising, I would say. I shared this with David, and he was interested, to say the least. I asked David what he would want me to say to you today, to those people who are interested in the Cambridge study still. And all he said was, it's really important that we continue to interview the men at age 70. It's a really important thing. And he paused for a second. He said, but then, of course, you've got to follow up the kids, the G3 kids. So hopefully you can find money to follow up the G3 kids. And he waited for a second. And then he said, and of course, there's the grandkids. There's the G4s. We should probably be interviewing those as well. So we should probably get some funding for that as well. The Cambridge study has made a major contribution to knowledge. It is essentially peerless in its comprehensiveness, in the duration that has existed, in the way that the data has been looked at. I am so happy that it has found a home here at the Institute of Criminology where it will exist in perpetuity because of the work that Penn has done in establishing that. And I hope that people will make use of it, keeping in mind David's spirit of sharing the data, collegiality, and moving forward key things. David was always very interested in new ideas and promoting that. So the key contributions we all know now. David, one of the things that David would really like to see done more is looking at within individual change. Much of the research that's been done in the Cambridge study is comparing individuals who have a certain characteristic to those who don't have a certain characteristic. He conducted work looking at employment, looking at, as I said, individuals who they're offending when they were employed compared to when they were not employed, when they would commit more offenses, and then when they were employed again. And he would like to see more within individual studies using the Cambridge study done, if possible, perhaps even replicating that employment study. Hint, hint, he said. I will end it there, but I'd like to thank you all very much for attending. I do hope that people will make use of the Cambridge Study archive when it becomes available. And if anybody finds £200,000 or £300,000 down the back of there, so we could really use it to continue the interviewing. I want to, before I step down, just thank Hannah again for being such an absolutely amazing go-getter sort of person that just went and adopted the attitude of getting it done. It was a very difficult issue to navigate for all sorts of reasons, but she managed it amazingly. Richard has tolerated me for far too many years now in all of my unreasonable requests and always finds a way to get things done as best as possible. We wouldn't have the interviews without him. We wouldn't have the next phase of the Cambridge study if it wasn't for him. So thank you very much.